just gonna die in the end. Okay, guys, we're going to be doing something entirely different today. For those of you who don't know, some time ago, I had the inspiration. I've been so moved by anime that I wanted to write my own anime-styled story. So, not being an artist, I wrote a light novel and had it, I had someone else do some artwork for me to put within the story. But it's basically just what I wrote was the prologue to my story, which is called Roja. Now, I sold a bunch of those. I had autographed copies available. Unfortunately, I don't have the autographed copies available anymore. You can buy it still at Amazon, and I'll put the link in the description. And if somebody decides to buy it, by all means, I'll put a P.O. box in there, address for me as well. If you want to send me a copy and have me sign it and send it back to you, I'll be more than happy to do so. But what I wanted to do today is read you the story. I'm going to split it into 2 different videos, and I want to read you the entirety of the Roja prologue because I want to get your feedback. Tell me what you think of it. Having heard this, having read it, if you already bought it, do you want to know the rest of this story, or do you want to know where this story goes from here? Because I've got a third of the first novel already written. Now, I've been away from it for a while because I've had so many different things going on, and I'm now doing a restructuring of my time, and I want to see if there's enough interest from you guys for me to designate some of that time towards completing the first book of Roja following the prologue. But this is the easiest listen you'll ever have. As I'm reading this, I'll just post a couple of the different pictures that are from the book. But for the most part, it's just for you to listen to, decide if you like it. Again, if you want to buy the book, by all means, please do so. I love for a lot of you to have this book. But again, if you want it signed, you just have to send it to me. But again, links in the description. Please let me know what you think of this. And honestly, if it's something that you want to hear more of, read more of, going forward. Here we go. It had only been a matter of time for quite some time. As technology grew throughout the world, a wider variety of weapons of mass destruction had been created and became much easier to manufacture, resulting in most nations of the world possessing the ability to inflict catastrophic damage. Even the smaller rogue nations led by delusional dictators had been able to secure apocalyptic weaponry. Finally, someone blinked, and everything changed forever. Who actually threw the first punch was always a matter of great debate among the few remaining after the apocalypse, but it was a moot point anyway. The simple fact was that over 95% of the Earth's population had been eliminated, and the entire topography and nature of the planet was forever altered. As bands of the living began emerging from their various hiding places, an immediate class designation was observed. The protected were those who had survived by being members of the previous world's privileged class. They were high-ranking politicians and the rich and influential. Basically, those with the means to have protective measures from the carnage available to them. The other class was known as the survivors. These were folks without privilege, but through a combination of determination and luck, had somehow managed to escape the cloak of death that had wrapped itself around the very large part of the population. Further complicating things for those still walking around was that the fallout from nuclear weapons, combined with the toxicity of truly sinister varieties of chemical weapons, had left many people sick and/or mutated. Many died in the first weeks after the final war due to the effects of these horrific weapons. However, others who had been exposed to the airborne chemical horrors developed mutations that were almost powers. It was as if some had been left living a Bruce Banner or Peter Parker type of existence. Still others had their DNA reconfigured but showed no visible effects. These people, though, would be passing along some of this mutated molecular structure to their offspring. It was impossible to tell how many future generations might still face various mutations, but it certainly would be many. As small societies began forming, the protected class generally felt that, even in this new reality, they should be the ones running the show. On many of them, it was completely lost that it was their leadership that had led to the downfall of humankind in the first place. Needless to say, many of the survivors weren't overly anxious to turn control of things back over to the privileged. Unfortunately, whether it was fear, confusion, or simply a lack of fortitude, a number of people chose to back the Protected's leaders to assume control of some of the larger swaths of habitable land in the new landscape of Earth. Many of the survivor class even jumped aboard the Protected's bandwagon as they or their children and loved ones were sick and felt that the experienced leaders would provide the most expedient path towards getting medical treatments instituted. Indeed, hospitals did begin being constructed. The fortunate thing was that many of the sick, both those suffering from effects of the war and those with unrelated illnesses, were getting help. For some of the mutated individuals, though, things took a pronounced, more insidious turn. Those with more extravagant mutated abilities were offered medical assistance to determine if they could be cured or at least have their symptoms diminished or eliminated. As it became apparent that some mutants were actually living comfortably with their new genetic makeup and that some of these mutated abilities were quite impressive, some of the ruling protected class began getting a bit uneasy. Behind closed doors in meeting rooms of the ruling class, conversations were taking place about the potential for those with special abilities to threaten the seat of power on which the protected sat. Their concern was that if any of their policies were to be poorly accepted by the masses, would it be possible that these mutants could be weaponized against them? This fear was compounded by an agreement among the forming nations that guns were no longer an option, as they were seen as the first step towards the type of destruction that had already once befallen society. At first, the fact that some of the special people started coming up missing was explained away by the notion that their mutations had become aggressive and their lives had unfortunately expired. Staff at the hospitals certainly seemed to be doing all they could for those with exceptional abilities born from their genetic reconstruction, but more and more often, it seemed, those efforts fell short. A young man named Alex Wright had been affected by a combination of chemicals used in weaponry during the war. He was 5 years old when the apocalypse took place. He lost his parents and all his extended family members either at the point of attack or in the days following. He had survived on his own for several weeks against the elements, the fallout, and aggressive survivors of the carnage. Alex was an absolutely adorable kid with a round face and, despite the immense tragedies of his short life, a quick and endearing smile. Finally, as small semblances of society began reforming, a security crew had discovered him and brought him to an orphanage that had been set up for the unfortunately small number of children who had made it through without their parents. Alex lived in the orphanage for several years as the society around them slowly began rebuilding and constructing the aforementioned hospitals and other human services. A young married couple, Armin and Deanna Angelis, ran the orphanage. They were paid by the burgeoning government for this service, but the truth was they would have done it for free. They couldn't have children of their own due to Deanna's war-related illness, so the few kids in the orphanage became like their own. As their first child in the home, plus his wonderfully happy and innocent demeanor, Alex was a favor of the Angelises. Armin in particular immediately bonded in a strong manner with the little guy. For the first few years at the children's shelter, the fact that Alex had developed some special abilities was not something that made itself apparent. The land throughout the world was still in a state of inconsistency. Earthquakes, mudslides, and similar repercussions of the pounding the planet had taken were common. One day, Armin and Alex, who was then 9 years old, went out to the back of the home to work on an addition Armin was constructing. A sudden, relatively slight, yet still potent tremor shook the area. A large boulder that had been situated up on a hill behind the orphanage took this opportunity to unmoor itself from the ground. It began rolling down, heading right towards the house. Armin shouted an expletive and grabbed Alex up into his arms. He ran both of them out of the path of the huge rock. The boulder rumbled a destructive path down the hill and towards the orphanage. Fortunately, it became apparent that it wouldn't have enough momentum to traverse all the level ground between the hill and the house to do damage to the orphanage itself, but the new, partially completed addition wasn't within that obvious safe area. Armin and Alex watched breathlessly as the boulder's movement seemed to almost be unfolding in slow motion. "Please stop," Armin pleaded under his breath. His request was heeded as the big rock made it all the way to the outer wooden uprights of the construction, but came to rest perfectly leaned against them. Armin and Alex looked at each other. As if on cue, they both let out a huge exhale. Armin extended his hand and Alex high-fived him. "That was a little close for comfort," Armin observed. "That is one big stupid rock," Alex added to the observations. He wasn't wrong. The boulder had to be easily half a ton, and quite probably a bit more. "Well, I guess we won't be getting any work done today," Armin said, defeated. "I'll see if I can get a bunch of the guys together tomorrow, and maybe they can help me push this beast away from the house." "It's okay, Papa Armin," Alex said. "I'll move it for you." Armin chuckled and ruffled Alex's hair. "Thanks, pal," he said. "I'll go in and start making some sandwiches for lunch for everybody while you do it," he said with a trace of doubt. Armin began heading for the back door of the orphanage when a loud rumbling sound startled him. He jumped and whipped around, terrified he was going to see yet another boulder had broken loose. Instead, he saw the boulder that had almost taken out their house rumbling back towards the hill from where it came. Needless to say, his jaw almost bounced off the ground as he wordlessly realized that it was Alex who had provided the thrust for the rock's movement. As the boulder stopped rolling, Alex casually approached it and gave it another shove, once again sending it crashing back towards the hill. Armin ran towards the little man. He held him by the shoulders and exclaimed, "Alex! How did you—" His voice trailed off as the amazement took his words while he stared at the boulder, which was now resting a good 50 yards away. Alex simply and innocently looked up at Armin and said, "Is that far enough, Papa Armin, or do you want I should push it some more?" "Alex, do you know what you've done here?" Armin asked his little pal, trying to determine if Alex understood how believable this feat was. "Yeah," Alex responded. "I pushed the big rock." "But you shouldn't be able to do that," Armin explained, still unable to comprehend what he had just seen. "I'm sorry, Papa Armin," Alex said. "Did I do something wrong?" Armin quickly backtracked, not realizing he had given the youngster the wrong idea. "No, not at all," he said, giving a comforting hug to Alex as he spoke. "It's just that a little guy like you, or anyone for that matter, usually doesn't have the strength to push a boulder that's almost as big as a house." "That was easy," Alex explained. "When I push things hard, they usually move. When I try to pick things up, I usually can." Armin was amazed at how normal and easy this seemed to Alex. "How long have you been able to do this?" the older man asked. "You know, be able to move anything you want," he explained. Alex shrugged. "Quite a while now. Moving stuff is kind of easy. I've always been pretty good at it." "Yeah," Armin agreed, still shaken. "Pretty good." Armin didn't want to continue making a big deal about the whole thing because he didn't want Alex to feel self-conscious or that he was a freak or something. He knew the boy's strength was obviously a mutation, but seeing the magnitude of his ability was jarring. With the boulder cleanly out of the way, the boys went about their work as if nothing were amiss. He didn't display it in front of Alex, but inside, Armin was shaking with excitement. He couldn't wait for their day's work to be completed so he could tell Deanna about the boy's abilities and find out if she had ever had any inklings of such things. "I knew he was strong for his size and age, but I never had any idea it was anything like what you described," an incredulous Deanna said later that night. Armin had waited until all the kids were into bed before discussing the day's events with his wife, but now the couple were both excited and fascinated. "I've heard of mutations like this," Armin said thoughtfully, "where people had special powers and were able to live otherwise normal lives with them, but I've never actually seen it before. Not something at this level." "I know," his wife agreed. "The huge majority of mutations I've known of personally have led to the death of the people who had them." "Do you think this mutation, is dangerous for Alex?" Armin asked, that fearful thought suddenly hitting him. "Should we bring him to a doctor?" "That would probably be a good idea," Deanna agreed. "Finding out he has this gift was exciting to me, but I never thought about the idea that it might be harmful to him. He's always been so healthy." Well, don't worry about it just yet, Armin reassured her. Like I said, I've heard of people who have had these powers and lived normal lives. He'll probably be fine. We just need to get him checked out to make sure he's okay. Deanna smiled and nodded her agreement, but she was clearly concerned. Are we almost all done, Mama Deanna? Alex asked. He was sitting in just his underwear on an exam table in a small room in the hospital. I think so, baby, Deanna reassured him as she laid her head on top of his. A bright young physician named Dr. Waters entered the room, chart in hand. He smiled at Alex, then addressed the adults. Blood tests came back great. Every part of the physical and psychological evaluations were at the top of the charts for a youngster of his age. The doctor turned his attention back to Alex. You are one healthy young man, Alex, he said with a reassuring wink. Cool. Can I get dressed and go home now, please? He asked, the innocence and gentleness of his nature evident even in this brief sentence. Absolutely, Dr. Waters responded. Put your clothes on, but can you do just a couple little things with me before you go? I promise there won't be any poking and prodding, and they might actually be kind of fun. Okay, Alex agreed. Can I have a lollipop when we're done? By all means, the doctor said. Alex looked to Armin and Deanna with absolute admiration in his eyes. Can my mama and papa have one too? He asked. Of course, Dr. Waters says. What a good man you are to be looking out for your parents. Just give me a moment. Dr. Waters opened the door and called out into the hallway. Okay, man, bring that right in as soon as you can, please. Dr. Waters moved away from the door as they all awaited whatever was being delivered. Armin looked a bit uneasy. He began, that thing about the lollipops is legit, right? I mean, we are all going to get one. Deanna reached out and smacked Armin in a scolding manner. What? Armin protested. I just wanted to make sure he was going to come through. I like lollipops. Amused, Dr. Waters reassured him. Yes, sir. There will be lollipops for all. Armin smiled a huge, satisfied grin, then stuck his tongue out at his exasperated wife. He then held up his hand to Alex and received a high five. The whole exchange made Alex laugh, which, of course, had been Armin's goal all along. Three maintenance workers entered the room, struggling to carry in a large metal desk and drawers. They grunted and groaned their way into the room and set the behemoth down next to Dr. Waters. Thanks, gentlemen, Dr. Waters said. I'll give you a call in a few minutes to bring it back downstairs. They each grunted unenthusiastic groans and walked out of the exam room. Dr. Waters turned his attention to Alex. Okay, my little friend, he began. This desk is from the maintenance department. It's made of metal and has all kinds of nuts, bolts, and various construction stuff in the drawers. Do you think you could do me a favor with it, Alex? Alex shrugged and nodded. Sure, he said with enthusiasm. Great, the doctor said. Could you come over here and, very gently and carefully so you don't hurt yourself, see if you can lift this? His voice trailed off as Alex had already jumped off the exam table. In a flash, the little dude snatched the desk off the ground as if it were made of soap bubbles. Where do you want me to put it? Alex asked the physician. Dr. Waters' eyes grew wide. Oh, wow, he exclaimed, stunned. The doctor quickly regained his composure. You can go ahead and put it back down right there. Thanks, Alex. The little guy smiled, nodded, and gently returned the desk back to the ground. Dr. Waters turned to the other adults. Well, you folks clearly weren't exaggerating, he admitted. He then turned to Alex once again. Did that feel heavy to you at all, Alex? He asked. Nah, Alex responded. Heavy things seems to get easier for me to lift every day. I can lift that table I was sitting on for you if you want me to, he offered. That table is bolted to the floor, Alex, Dr. Waters pointed out. I know, Alex said, unfazed. He took the couple steps over to the table and grabbed a hold. Immediately, the squealing, crunching sound of bolts about to be ripped out of the floor could be heard. Whoa, okay, I believe you, the doctor exclaimed, his hands held out, signaling for Alex to please not to rip the table out of its anchored spot. Alex smiled and released the table. Dr. Waters thought for a moment, then had another idea. Can we try one more thing, Alex? He asked. Sure, Alex responded. This part is fun. I like lifting stuff. Okay, hold on, the doctor said, and he hurried out the door. Once Dr. Waters was outside, Alex, as he always tended to do, came over to be close to his adopted parents. I could have lifted that table for him if he would have let me, he explained to Armin. Armin chuckled. I have no doubt, kiddo, he responded. Dr. Waters re-entered the room. He was holding an egg in his hand. Okay, Alex, he began. Let's play another little game. You go over there to the corner of the room, as far away from me as you can get, all right? Sure, Alex said, and he did as he was instructed. We're going to play a little game of pitch and catch, Dr. Waters explained. But the thing is, this is a raw egg. It's not hard-boiled. So we're going to toss it back and forth and see if we can both catch it gently enough so as to not break it. Sound like fun? Sounds like you're going to get egg mess on yourself, a confident Alex responded. I like your confidence, Dr. Waters said. Here we go. The doctor tossed the egg to the boy. Alex followed the egg's flight and deftly caught it in a gentle motion in which he tried to match his hand speed to that of the eggs as the white sphere descended down to him. Alex easily made the catch. Your turn, Alex said with a grin. He tossed the egg back to the medical man. Dr. Waters was also successful in making the catch with the egg fully intact. This exchange went on for a couple more rounds until finally, Dr. Waters didn't receive a toss as gently as necessary and the egg cracked open in his hand, spritzing his lab coat with yellowish goo. Alex burst out in laughter. I win, he exclaimed. Smiling and wiping the mess from his hands onto his lab coat, the doctor agreed. You certainly did, Alex. Well done. Armin and Deanna had been watching the whole thing with interest and curiosity. Suddenly, it came to Armin what the doctor was looking for. I get it, Armin opined. You're checking to see if he can be gentle, if he can control his strength. Yes, the doctor confirmed, and the early results are very positive. Yeah, I had thought about that too, Armin began, but then I think about how gentle and good he is with the other kids in the orphanage. They all love him. Plus he plays with them, and us, just like a little dude with no special strength. I think he can completely turn it on and off at will. Alex heard this and looked at Dr. Waters and nodded his enthusiastic agreement. I've got an idea, Armin offered. He walked over and right in front of his little man. Alex, can you push me, but just hard enough to take a step back? Don't put me through the wall or push so lightly it doesn't affect me. Do you think you can do that? Sure, Alex said without hesitation. He put a hand on his dad's chest and gave, by Alex's standards, the tiniest of a push. Armin did indeed need to take a step back to regain his balance, but no more than that. Perfect, Armin said. Now, Alex, can you push me hard enough to knock me off my feet? Not through the wall or anything, but just enough to make me fall. Yes, I can, Alex said, distress in his voice. But I don't want to hurt you, Papa Armin. You won't, pal, Armin reassured him. I'm a big boy. I can take a fall. I just want to show Dr. Waters what perfect control you have of your strength. Alex was a little apprehensive about pushing down the man who means so much to him, but he agreed. Okay, Alex said. Again, he put a hand on Armin's chest and gives a gentle shove. This one is perfectly enough to make the man stumble to the ground. From his seated position, he looks up at his boy and says, Perfect. Alex didn't like having to do this. He rushed up to Armin and gently lifted him off the ground and back to a standing position. Are you okay, Papa Armin? He asked. I'm fine, kiddo, Armin reassured. You did great. He certainly did, Dr. Waters chimed in, a smile on his face. Not only is young Alex here the picture of health, but he also has perfect control over his special ability. I think you're a remarkable young man, he told the lad. And now it's time for lollipops. Deanna came over to hug Alex, which he absolutely loved. Armin was intently watching the doctor head to the candy jar. I did have to get pushed on the ground, Armin began. I think that might be worth 2 lollipops? Deanna put an exasperated hand to her head. There is so much wrong with you, she explained to her husband. Armin nodded his agreement with that and gave Alex a thumbs up. The little man broke up in laughter. Dr. Waters fished out all 3 lollipops. Much later in the day, Dr. Waters was working behind the main desk at the hospital doing some paperwork. A couple of men dressed in suits came in. They were too far from Dr. Waters at that point for him to notice or hear them, but the men were asking a nurse a few questions. She gestured over towards Dr. Waters as the man their questions led her to point out. The men approached. The first guy was very tall, the second guy more rotund, and they both seemed like guys who were pretending not to be intimidating, but doing a bad job of it. Are you Dr. Waters? The first guy asked. That's what I write on the waistband of my underwear, he began. The doctor looked up and saw the serious-looking guys and changed his demeanor a bit. Who's asking? He queried. We're with the security team, tall dude said. We understand you had a patient earlier today, a young male, the second guy said. Is it true he had some sort of mutated abilities? These two had definitely raised a bit of concern for the doctor. Hold on just a second, he began. You guys are security for who? The men had been attempting, poorly, to seem affable, but then Tall Guy's tone turned a bit more sinister. That's on a need-to-know basis, and frankly, you don't need to know, he explained. So we'll ask again. This young man had some abilities? Dr. Waters wasn't actually scared of these guys, but he knew he should probably tread lightly, not only for himself, but out of concern for his patient. Yeah, he had unusual strength, he began, trying to play down Alex's gifts. But he was very much in control of them, not much to really get excited about. I see, said the second guy. So you won't mind then if we have a look at his file and any notes you made in there then, right? Dr. Waters knew this was where he needed to draw the line. Actually, that would be a problem, he stated. I'm not turning over confidential information on any of our patients. I understand, said Round Boy. Then we'll just come back there and take a look ourselves. With that, Dr. Waters got to his feet. Fortunately, several members of the hospital staff had gathered within earshot of this little exchange, and now they all moved to back up Dr. Waters. Along with a couple maintenance guys, some other doctors and nurses were the hospital's head nurse, a not quite 5-foot-tall, 50-something-year-old grandma named Shireen, who quite obviously had no shits to give. Step your skinny, tall ass back, you stick-figure-looking tough guy, she commanded. Her tone actually took the men aback. I don't know who you clowns are or who you work for, but you ain't looking at nothing in here without the proper authorization. And if you take another step towards our records, you won't have to worry about no one else, because I'll slap this stupid off your faces myself. The two security dudes looked around and saw that the number of hospital employees surrounding them had grown even more, and they were all looking pretty tense. They looked to one another and silently decided that maybe this battle best not be fought today. It might well be that they were also a bit concerned about actually getting the stupid slapped off their faces as well. Wordlessly, the men walked out. Dr. Waters put his arm admiringly around Shireen's shoulders. Shireen, my dear, you have such a gentle touch, he extolled. It's why we love you. Shireen was still seething. She certainly seemed to be the type that, once triggered, didn't come back down too quickly. Uh-huh, she said, still staring at the door the men had walked out. Don't come into my hospital like you're some dumbass gangster demanding we show you something. I'll show them something they ain't never seen before. Their own kidneys. Everyone on staff was filled with admiration, respect, and a little fear of Shireen. Several of them helped her to calm down and took her for a coffee. Hopefully decaf. A few days later, though, Alex's file mysteriously disappeared.